We're a little late to the party here, but I assume that means that everyone who was going to see Thunderbolts has already done so. Which is good, because we're going to be talking about Thunderbolts, Marvel's movie about a group of C-list masks played by B-list actors. Spoilers ahead. 3, 2, 1. It's kind of weird that they spent so much time establishing that Bucky was Alexei's biological father, but I thought it brought an interesting dynamic to the film. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about Taskmaster. Yeah, I didn't see this coming either. So, those who have seen the film will know that Taskmaster bites it pretty early on. People who haven't seen the film will also know this. It was something of a running joke how little Taskmaster was seen in the trailers leading up to the movie's release, despite how regularly she was included in other promotional materials. It's not too surprising. I witnessed the same prediction made for Slipknot in the first Suicide Squad, which turned out to be 100% accurate. What is surprising is that I think Taskmaster might have gotten a rawer deal than Slipknot. Certainly they must be running close on total screen time, with Taskmaster appearing for one brief but well choreographed fight scene, a single spoken line, and a few seconds of Olga Kurylenko's face so that the actress can properly claim credit before Ghost sends her to the farm upstate. Even worse, and what struck me in such a way as to make me write this script, is that Taskmaster's untimely end ultimately feels pointless. What was very clear from Slipknot's short career is that his character was used to establish the stakes, to prove the existence and effectiveness of the bombs implanted in the Suicide Squad's heads, and to also promise that characters are mortal in that story. You'd be unsurprised, I imagine, to learn that the Thunderbolts are not the Suicide Squad. Not only do none of the other Thunderbolts fall in the process of the story, but the movie is decidedly less than lethal after Taskmaster's exit. Val comes close, and we could debate Bob's exact circumstances, but every named character survives this movie except for Taskmaster. So Taskmaster isn't used to establish stakes or threat. After all, the person who puts her down, Ghost, is quickly allied with the others and takes a firm backseat in the action once the movie reaches the limo chase. And I can confirm that there is no plot motive either. The events of the movie would be identical with or without her involvement. But surely there must be some thematic element to this, some reason to retire the character so coldly and decisively. I mean, there's an attempt. Illyana's the most upset about the whole thing, being the only one to have any connection to Taskmaster. Hello, editing me here. Somehow I got it into my mind whilst writing the script that Florence Pugh's character is called Illyana. She's not. Her name is Yelena. But I am going to refer to her as Illyana throughout this video from now on. So I want to let you know about that in advance, not to get confused. I figured out, after a little bit of soul searching, what happened was I've been playing a lot of Marvel's Midnight Suns recently, and I may have gotten this character, Yelena Belova, confused with Ilyana Rasputina, aka Magic. So, when I refer to a character in the script as Ilyana, know that I actually mean Yelena, the blonde Russian Black Widow, and not Ilyana, the blonde Russian mutant. Sorry about that. This will now frustrate you for the rest of the video. Bye. She's none too pleased about Walker and Ghost looting her body, and there is a brief conversation between Ghost and Illyana about what happened once they are out of the facility, and here specifically Illyana shows the source of her empathy. She relates her own experience to Taskmaster's. They share an origin, and Illyana could clearly see herself in the exact same position. This also thematically ties into Illyana's monologue at the movie's opening, the thematic discussion of mental health and redemption that touches all the characters of this movie, especially Bob. But I don't think it really goes the full distance on this. After the dialogue with Ghost, Taskmaster is never mentioned again, despite the short time span the events of the movie takes place within. To me, I expected this character's tragedy to remain fresh in the minds of the others, but even when finally confronting the character that orchestrated Taskmaster's demise and the attempted elimination of the others, it is left completely unmentioned, seemingly entirely forgotten. I was waiting for Illyana to say something, or even Ghost to express her guilt and regret at so easily being manipulated into targeting someone she had so much in common with. But nothing happened. I don't even seem to recall the characters having anything more interesting to say at this point either. It's their first meeting with Val after the facility, but the scene is more interested in introducing Sentry as quickly as possible. I'm not really asking for much here, a line of dialogue to prove that at least one character has memory, has empathy, a third beat to tie the movie together. You could argue that there's already 3 beats in the movie regarding Taskmaster: Illyana's initial reaction, her disgust at the other 2 scavenging, and then the exchange with Ghost, but these are such short, minor beats, and they're all in the first half of the movie. Hell, I thought it was weird that Illyana never mentioned Taskmaster to Alexei during the limo drive. Of all the people in the movie, Alexei's the only other one with any connection to Taskmaster. He actually fought her in Black Widow, in a scene that was also stained by missed opportunity. That's more than Illyana ever knew her. He's also the one who knows most about the other Black Widows, about the Red Room, about Ray Winston's accent. Understandably, not everyone watching Thunderbolts can be expected to have seen Black Widow and Hawkeye, so the film can't be written to assume the audience is familiar with Illyana's loyalty to her fellow Widows or her heartbreak over Natasha's endgame. But Thunderbolts does do the work to remind you, only for it to be for nothing. In a film that starts by telling you that Illyana is still thinking about her sister, the woman she saw save Taskmaster from her own father right in front of her, to then not tie in Taskmaster's fate thematically, either as a fellow victim and weapon, or as a living legacy of Natasha's heroism, is a real shame. Even something as small as Alexei telling Illyana that the Thunderbolts are destined to be a team because they all made it out of the facility alive, together, only for Illyana to tell him that not all of them did, would be enough. Hell, if you're looking for small things to make Taskmaster's inclusion worth it, have John replace his shield with hers after his gets tacoed, or have Ghost use Taskmaster's bow and arrow in their beatdown by Sentry. Make them looting her body visually meaningful, rather than have them just steal a nebulous quantity of ammo that the audience isn't tracking anyway. Or even just have Ghost hesitate to talk about her gun in front of Illyana while they're in the lorry. I appreciate that making a movie is never easy. A lot can change between the first draft and final screening. I heard rumour of scenes left on the cutting room floor that would have given Ghost and Walker something to actually do in the second half of the film, and also whispers of an earlier version of the script where Taskmaster was much more involved. How we would get from there to here, and who was ultimately responsible for it, I don't know, but what we ended up with seems so strange, because you could remove Taskmaster from the film and nothing would significantly change. Why she was kept in is ultimately up to speculation, but the fact that she was, and that the only significant detail of that inclusion is a 9mm hole in her mask, makes it seem like she was pushed in just to be bumped off. Why this would be considered necessary, I do not know. Taskmaster hadn't been seen since Black Widow, a film that most followers of the Marvel Cinematic Universe would describe as not necessary viewing. And it wasn't like everyone was asking, where's Taskmaster, when she wasn't on screen. This character, of all characters, was probably the most easy to have disappear into the ether, or have silenced off-screen Days of Future Past style. To go to the lengths of showing the audience a body to confirm it, and then treat her without respect or proper acknowledgement, comes across as almost cruel. I might actually feel more sorry for Taskmaster because of how this movie treats her than anything Black Widow told me about her. And again, if the movie's thematic point is the pointlessness and indignity of this event, then it doesn't do the work to earn it. You could argue that nihilism is baked into the character's worldview at the start of this film, but the ultimate message of Thunderbolts is fighting that instinct through empathy and connection with others. If every other Thunderbolt gets to be a part of that, shouldn't Taskmaster, at least in spirit? Funnily enough, this script would have ended here, were it not for the fact that I have just recently seen Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which has resurfaced some lingering thoughts about its predecessor and intended first half, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. So, spoiler warning for both. It really was weird that they waited 3 days to reveal that Ethan Hunt had survived the plane crash. I wonder if there was any significance in that. Anyway, Leaving the theatre after Dead Reckoning Part 1, I was not exactly happy. I just witnessed the last moments of Ilsa Faust, one of the franchise's most seasoned characters, and I'll be honest, I wasn't quite ready to accept it. I was ready to fall into denial, to tell myself it was a fake out and that Ilsa would be back in Dead Reckoning Part 2. That Rebecca Ferguson's explanations for leaving the franchise were just keeping up the kayfabe. I was in a weird headspace. Rewatching Dead Reckoning Part 1 in preparation for Final, I finally came to terms with the fact that Ilsa would not be coming back, that the filmmakers had left no ambiguity about it, and that she would be staying in Venice forever. I could argue that they should have sold it a little better, but really I'd just have preferred if they'd made the fight choreography less ridiculous. I remain adamant that there is no way someone with a sword should have lost to someone with 2 knives. There's just too much difference in reach. Not that you know it, with Ilsa insisting on spinning constantly and swinging like she's trying to hit Gabriel, the primary antagonist, with the handle. You'd think, for a highly trained secret agent with a prophecy of doom hanging over her, that she'd try a little less hard to best Gabriel and a little harder to stay alive. This brings us to Final Reckoning. There's a brief montage to summarise the events of previous Mission Impossibles, including Ilsa's departure. She is then never mentioned again throughout the rest of the film. Strange. Not least because Ethan does exchange words with Gabriel about the sudden retirement of one of his other teammates, Luther. Now, admittedly, Luther gets buried in the beginning of Final Reckoning, and Ilsa expired in the previous movie. The part 1 to this movie is part 2, but never mind that. It's not unreasonable that the film prefers to have Ethan's revenge focused through that. But there's also an extra element to this. Throughout both reckonings, we keep getting flashbacks to a previous encounter between Ethan and Gabriel, where Gabriel takes another life, the life of another woman that Ethan was close to. The act is immortalised into the movie's canon as the event that led Ethan to join the IMF in the first place, and that's all that's commented on it. The movie puts a lot of stock into Gabriel making Ethan into the man he is, but the two never discuss either of the 2 women we know Gabriel has erased, only Luther. By the end of Final Reckoning, I wouldn't have been able to tell you the name of the flashback woman. IMDb tells me her name is Marie. And we know nothing else about her. She only exists in the vicinity of these 2 men. As if to add insult to this injury, Gabriel takes the time, in both movies, to recount to Grace, the latest woman to fall into Ethan's orbit, just how frequently women are put in danger around Ethan. And he's not wrong. In the first film, Ethan is, admittedly, seduced by Claire, a fellow IMF agent, but she doesn't survive to see the credits. In Mission Impossible 2, Nia Hall is stuck between Hunt and Ambrose's affections and becomes the film's MacGuffin with an estimated 20 hours to live. In Mission Impossible 3, Ethan's wife is threatened. Ethan starts to slow down after that. He's a married man now after all. Even his dynamic with Ilsa remains friendly but professional. The hug they share on the rooftop in Dead Reckoning struck me as strangely intimate for the 2 of them, although there's a clear case to be made for Mission Impossible Fallout putting a lot of effort into dancing around the possibility, going so far as to reintroduce Mrs. Julia Hunt in such a way as to imply permission. Nevertheless, Ethan is always saving Ilsa, in one way or another. She's just more capable than the other women, something the movie makes clear is as much part of the problem as it is the solution. So, Gabriel, the character, makes a big deal about the history of the Mission Impossible films dangling women on a stick for Ethan to chase. The filmmakers are at least aware of this damseling. Dead Reckoning the film, however, decides that the best step forward for the franchise is to fridge 2 women, serving as offset bookends to Ethan's IMF career. At this point, I realise that the people behind this franchise probably don't see what they're doing as sexist, maybe? For those not in the know, fridging is a term inspired by a Green Lantern comic to refer to the use of harm against other characters, predominantly women, as a motivator for the main character or as a plot device. In Dead Reckoning, Marie is the plot device, Ilsa is the motivation. Both are reduced to just this. Ilsa's function is to provide Ethan with a goober, share exposition, and be used to hurt Ethan. Neither are referred to by name in Final Reckoning. For anyone wondering if Ethan at least mentioned Ilsa during his confrontation with Gabriel immediately after Venice in Part 1, no. And for those curious, Taskmaster is not fridged because her execution does not change how any of the characters feel or move the plot forward in any way. Is that better? Is that worse? Is this a pretty bad situation to be in all around? I think so. Again, I'm not going to pretend that making films like Mission Impossible are easy. Reckonings 1 and 2 are both long films, with a lot of moving parts and a lot of characters. And from my understanding, not only are Christopher McQuarrie's scripts often changed during shooting, but Ferguson made the call that Part 1 would be her and Ilsa's final appearances in the franchise. How early into production this decision was made, and how much writers McQuarrie, Geller and Jendrison had in mind for Ilsa when it was, would be pure speculation on my part. Much in the same way I must enter conspiracy brain mode to suggest that Hayley Atwell's Grace is acting as a replacement for Ilsa. I mean this as no disrespect to Atwell, her performance for Grace is fantastic and absolutely distinct from Ferguson's. I'm just not sure that, with the exception of her contribution to the final resolution of the two-parter, the script team would have written Ilsa much differently. The less that I say about Grace's and Ethan's weird relationship, the better. Grace's relative naivety in the suspension bridge effect be damned, it's still so weird to see the speed at which something apparently sparks between her and Ethan, not to mention the oddly compromising shot compositions in a few scenes they share. Atwell appearing chest first into Ethan's hallucination might be explained away as an unfortunate combination of McQuarrie's intended direction and Atwell's natural anatomy, but if I have the eyes to see the ridiculousness of that scene on first viewing, then the seasoned director who oversaw the shooting and editing of the film must certainly have known what it was as well. And besides, she's in nothing more than a tank top, for that scene and that scene alone, in the middle of the Arctic Circle. These decisions aren't made by accident. Much in the same way that it was no accident that Paris gets to play nurse for Benji towards the climax. Paris is great, a fun addition to the cast, and putting her out of her comfort zone for this scene was arguably the right call to up the tension. I just want to talk to whoever decided she needed to be holding Simon Pegg's strangely smooth chest for that one shot. Oh, hey, would you look at that? I don't know what you can make of that information, doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway, as I was saying, there's no reason to speculate that the IMF team has a minimum brunette quota it has to meet in every movie. This is the thought of pure conspiracy theory. The fact that Degas joins the team only 10 minutes before Uther leaves a vacant seat also does not corroborate this as well. I mean, sure, they never actually meet, and sure, Degas never actually talks to his old partner Briggs again after they split, despite being in the same cave at one point, but Briggs takes the time to ask Ethan that Degas is alive, at least. There's always stuff that just ends up on the cutting room floor. And what can you do? The movie's 2 hours and 40 minutes long already. Look, again, I have to insist, I'm not asking for much. The right line at the right time makes all the difference. And I think it's easy for writers to put dead characters aside in their mind during the writing process. Many characters, especially ones that are written out early, can easily be considered solely as people who exist to stop existing. It's harder then, as a writer, to become attached to these characters, especially compared to the characters you'll be working with for the rest of the narrative. I myself have caught this tendency in my own writing, a callous bloodthirstiness in my earlier chapters that disappears by the conclusion. It turns out that it's quite hard to convince myself to extinguish a character I hadn't always assumed wouldn't make it. And I think audiences are generally accepting of a lack of bite in the last act. It's quite rare, at least in the blockbuster space we've been navigating here, to have less than 100% survival rate, no matter how implausible. But I would encourage writers to at least make their characters remember the people they are leaving behind as they progress. For starters, it's satisfying to have a callback. Secondly, showing empathy is, for the majority of audience members, an endearing quality. And thirdly, for freaks like me, having characters not acknowledge something that happened within the last hour of my experience feels like they either aren't paying attention or don't care. And the most important things as a creative that you want your audience doing is to pay attention and to care. And if your characters can't do it, then why should I?